Nezumi and Niasha stared into the shimmering structure in front of them. Elise, their instructor and mentor in their first mission with the Gilded Feather, had been pulled through this strange device before them. Markings of another world lined the room about them, and the archways gave way to some kind of meadow, and it beckoned them forward. Nezumi straightened her shoulders and looked over to Niasha, who stared back with the resolve to brave the unknown. They gave each other a nod and reached their arms out together. The sensation wasn't a pleasant one. Nezumi could feel every appendage of her body being ripped from its socket, especially so for her sensitive tail. She felt herself screaming, but heard no sound as her vision gave way to a plethora of colors painting the world around her. After what seemed like an eternity, she hit the soft ground of the meadow she had seen through the gateway. Nyasha was huddled over, holding her stomach, before a mixture of fish and stones found their way from her. Centering their heads, they saw that four-legged creature very much similar to a deer were prancing about the terrain, their blue coats and large moose-like horns creating an over-exaggerated silhouette onto the ground beside them. They would move about 200 yards before making a circle and moving the same. There was plenty of space for them to continue, but they almost seemed to be stuck in some kind of repetition. Turning behind her, she saw there was no longer a pathway home. Some trees could be seen off in the distance, their foliage a reddish purple extending several feet into the air. Let's see if we can find Elise. Maybe the tree back there? It's the only real landmark to orient ourselves to. Nyasha raised a thumb while picking herself up. Seems your stomach still pains you. She offered a shoulder to her friend, and they started towards a small cluster of trees. Setting her down, she noticed the sky wasn't the light blue she was accustomed to, but more of a purplish color. The orb hanging in the sky was a deep red color and didn't seem to offer much by the way of warmth. Actually, it was chilly. She rubbed the fur on her arms before sitting next to her friend. The vibrancy of her eyes seemed to be losing its zest. Nyasha, are you all right? The Tengu woman looked up to her and gave a forced smile. The sound of crashing thunder quickly broke the air and liquid began falling from the sky. Nezumi held out her hand as if to catch the rain, but pulled back quickly as a drop began to burn her vehemently. There wasn't anywhere to run as the assault continued. The best they managed was to pull themselves as close to the large trees as possible to shelter. The ground greedily drank the droplets that touched its surface, and just as suddenly the shower stopped. Listen, we need to move, all right? Nezumi said while pushing Nyasha to her feet. Where could she have gone? At the very least, we need to... Ow! She was interrupted as the two of them walked into an invisible wall. What's going on? She said, reaching out and confirming that indeed there was something in front of them, although they couldn't see anything. Nyasha squawked weakly, and Nezumi felt the full weight of her friend bearing down on her now. An archway opened up 10 feet from them, revealing some kind of shiny room where 3 lizard men entered into the meadow. They reminded her of the kobolds she had hunted with her father as part of her training, only they were so much larger. Each of them were at least 6 feet, and had been dressed in a gray uniform with strange embroidering on the front. The first one to enter also had a cloth helm with a duck's bill extending partially over its snout. This one had a more grayish color to its scales, while the other two following it were green and orangish-red color. Nezumi couldn't help but staring at the strange device he had been carrying. It reminded her of a crossbow and how it was held, but the construction was completely foreign and it glinted as if it were made of a high-quality polished metal. 2 of the lizard men slowly made their way closer, each hissing and spitting at them as they closed in. They didn't have any weapons in their hands, but their hulking presence put her at unease. She was sure their claws and teeth were more than enough to kill the 2 of them. Damn it, Nyasha, wake up, she said, shaking the unconscious body of her friend slumped against her. They continued inching forward while hissing and spitting, their arms raised in front of them. She started easing her to the ground and tried pulling her dagger as she did so. It was too late. The lizards were on top of the 2 of them and had restrained her before it left the scabbard. They started hissing and spitting at the one by the archway, and it returned the same. She realized now that this was how they communicated and not some sort of threat she thought it to be. Listen, we didn't mean to trespass. We need to find our friend. She felt a sharp pain in her neck and felt the world growing black as the embrace of the large arms loosened. Her eyes slowly opened to another one of those lizard people. This one had on a large coat that trailed to the floor and was the brightest shade of white she had ever seen. It looked over at her and adjusted some kind of glass fixtures that were placed over its eyes by a black frame. She tried to move, but was horrified to see she was tied with leather straps to some kind of table. She began to scream while pulling against the restraints, but stopped when she saw that the lizard in the white coat raised his hands in front of him, and he started backing away, a look of fear emanating from him. She stared at him with curiosity more than anything now, as he continued backing up and eventually made it to some kind of contraption on the wall of the room. A strange metal box built into the wall, its surface a blue color with strange markings on it, presumably these lizards' language, she surmised. It pressed a finger to it and began speaking into it. Soon after, two more of them entered the room, one of them much shorter and far less muscular. The scales were a whitish pink-like color, and it had those same pieces of glass fashioned over its eyes. The coat it wore dragged on the ground a bit as it walked over to the first one and began communicating in a higher pitch than the other ones. The first one quickly adopted a look of absolute defeat, as if it had been admonished severely by the smaller one. Nezumi couldn't help finding the situation a bit comical, even if she wasn't wholly sure of the situation and her position in all of this. The shortest one turned and confidently walked over. She began hissing and spitting at Nezumi, but it was clear that she knew they couldn't understand each other. It compensated by making a series of hand gestures that she still couldn't really make out. It pulled out a strange rectangular bauble that it put over its face like a bulky blindfold. As she was hissing, she pointed over to the first lizard, who began switching the lighting of the room on and off. She couldn't make out how he had achieved this, as there weren't any torches illuminating the room. Looking around for the first time, she saw that everything in here save the bits of furniture were completely foreign. Large machines that shone with the hues of gemstones and steel were all about, and moving characters danced on signs around her. Feeling the overwhelmingly unfamiliarity with the environment, she resolved herself to focusing back on the one in front of her. It was explaining something, although it was well beyond her to understand it. After a few moments more, the table she was on tilted more forward, and the small one walked so close that Nezumi could smell the strange pheromones it gave off. It was a sweet scent, like a mango, she thought. It wasn't long before the strange blindfold was placed over her eyes, and she saw only black. A few hisses and the lights of various colors began flashing before her. She felt her anxiety grow, but did her best to endure whatever was happening, feeling now that the lizard people didn't intend her harm. Her body began to seize, and she heard more hisses and spits before she felt herself fall into the blackness once more. She awoke unrestrained, sitting on a very comfortable cloth bench that was, 10 times more comfortable than her own bed of molted tengu feathers. Sitting up, she saw Niasha tucked into a chair, padded well with, whatever material it was. She did her best to force herself up from the extreme comfort and wrapped her arms around her. I was afraid I lost you. I'm happy you're okay. Looking around, she saw the room was decorated in many velvet and gold intricate patterns. Tapestries with strange symbols hung about, and it looked like a lizard with rings dancing upon its edges. Ah, Miss Nezumi, finally awake are we? I'm Saw, assistant head scientist to Lullerine. The same lizard man that had been in front of her the first time she awoke was now walking through a doorway with 3 mugs on a platter. He began putting the tray onto the floor, and when a table of purple light appeared seemingly from nowhere, accepting the burden. I apologize again for your ordeal the two you must have gone through, but what in Onma's name were you doing at the Hollow Zoo? What's a Hollow Zoo? Nezumi questioned. Forgive me, I shouldn't have asked. You two should be resting. There will be plenty of time for talking later. Nezumi began scowling at him. Oh, well, if you insist, he said, raising his hands placantly. First off, you're on planet Alkim, in the Desseria Nebula, home to the Bashari lizard and the amphibious Vodolkin. Nezumi felt herself growing more irritated as the information overwhelmed her. Why don't we wait? The implants are a bit hard on anyone's neural network at first. At the word implant, a pain she hadn't noticed before blossomed, and the back of her neck felt as if it had been burned with a branding iron. I insist this time, he said, lifting himself from the chair. Please, drink this. It will help you sleep and ward off the thirst each of you must be feeling. Don't worry, we did bioscans to confirm it's okay with each of your physiologies. She took the cup and soothed her dry throat. It was very sweet, like the hot cow's milk and honey her father would make for her when she felt ill. By the time she had looked up, Sar the lizard man from before had gone. They told me we were the first foreign visitors to their homeworld in a long time, Niasha said enthusiastically. Nezumi cleared her throat. I'm not sure we should be so quick to trust anyone here, even if they seem okay. Niasha frowned. They helped me. I was sick, Nezumi. They even gave us implants to help us understand everyone. She felt the passion from Niasha and raised her hands in succession. I see. Well, we're in this together, so be sure to have my back, okay? Niasha nodded to her, and the two of them stayed up talking like so many nights of their childhood. They drifted off to sleep and were awakened by the doorway opening and a small white-pink lizard in a similar coat to Sar appeared. I'm Lalorine, head scientist, second only to the Queen of Alkim. I trust the two of you can understand me now. Nezumi sat up, rubbing her eyes. I can. I want to thank you for making it possible to communicate. The lizard woman smiled a toothy grin. Good to see you lesser species have some manners at least. She let the remark slide. Now, fresh clothing has been prepared for you. She raised a claw, and two lizard men brought in containers of a strange material with stranger steel clothing within. You'll need these to survive the environment of our planet, so I suggest you put them on without fuss. She looked at the other two and raised a claw to the door, and they exited. Go ahead and change. I'll brief you as we go. First off, you're going before our Queen Sarepta. She is as benevolent as she is brash and bolden, so I'd highly recommend only speaking when spoken to. The chips we implanted will help you understand our language along with most other major races within the known systems. Why are you making that face at me, girl? Nezumi had stopped the strange, stretchy leather only halfway up her torso and looked over in complete confusion. Listen, Lalorine, right? I have no idea what anything is here. I don't know what this stretchy leather is, or a holly zoo, or a planet, or even what a chip is supposed to be for that matter. The lizard woman started to laugh, her shoulders moving as she attempted to conceal her face. It's hollow zoo, silly. You're both quite ignorant, aren't you? Leather has long been outclassed by synthetic biofilms like that starsuit you're putting on. It is virtually tear-proof, liquid-resistant, and has extreme flexible quality. As she was saying this, Nezumi resumed pulling the suit up, which hugged around her body like a perfectly tailored outfit. Her tail poked through a small slit made for it. It even boasts a built-in phaser shield. A bit much for strangers that appeared from nowhere in our little hollow zoo, but a gift freely given. Seriously, you'll need them. The atmosphere will kill you. I was told you've already felt the rainfall from here. Nezumi looked over to Niasha, who was cutting at the suit with one of her knives to no avail. She laughed as she saw the built-in hood hug around her head. The air is plenty compatible with your physiology, so there won't be any problems in that regard. Are you two listening? Niasha had thrown the handle end of the knife at Nezumi, who playfully laughed at her strange look in the suit hugging under their frames. Lalorine sighed. Get your boots on already, and don't worry about your other belongings. I'll have them brought to the ship. What's a ship? Niasha asked with bright eyes. You'll see soon enough. Now hurry along. She turned just as the two of them fastened the well-fitting biofilm boots to their feet, completing the set. The three of them made it back through the door where they were met with two lizard men from before. Holding the strange crossbow she had seen earlier, both of them seemed completely annoyed by Lalorine, who proceeded to scold them for not having a ship ready yet. The two of them ran off, and a minute later they made their way out through many white hallways decorated with signs bearing moving pictures and the like. How do they make the pictures speak, Nezumi? Niasha asked, pointing at one of them. Maybe it's some kind of sorcery or a powerful illusion magic. A sigh was heard from in front of them as they continued on speculating just how the magic worked. They came to a blue-shielded archway that looked like it went to some kind of large stable, only there weren't horses but massive ships that took off and landed from the sky. Both of their jaws went slack as they saw the spectacle. It was absolutely breathtaking. The second the blue obstacle was removed, a rush of air and loud noises from these machines cascaded upon them. That's ours, ladies, come on, said Lalorine, pointing to a bulkier-looking one with a triangular point. They were led to a ramp where a blue-skinned man dressed in some kind of sailor's clothes stood to welcome them. Have them brought to the guest quarters, would you, Jedediah? The blue-skinned man smiled, revealing yellow, flat teeth, one with a sizable hole in it. Absolutely, Miss Lalorine. Oi, Flotsam, Jetsam, over here. Escort these two to the guest quarters. Two more blue-skinned figures appeared and beckoned them to follow. Nezumi noticed they had gills on the side of their necks and surmised they must have been the Vidalcan race that Sar mentioned. When they arrived, he was actually already seated on one of the chairs. Ready for me to fill you in a bit? He smiled at them as they continued looking about, taking in their surroundings. "Everything is so cool here," Niasha started. "I wish Aline could see it." Nezumi snapped her from her awe and looked down, ashamed at having forgot their senior guide and guildmate was still missing. "Have you seen anyone that looks kind of like me here? Another Waisoki, I mean." Sar looked at her. "I've heard of a race called the Waisoki in another system, but haven't actually seen any before. I was actually told they were quite small, no more than 4 feet actually, and more plump." "I'm average height," Nezumi said, "and the one I'm looking for is about the same. Have you seen her?" Sar shook his head. "I'm sorry, I haven't, nor have I heard of reports of any other races appearing here other than you two. We're quite interested in you, Miss Niasha. There aren't any accounts of Tengu bird people you claim to be. You're a new discovery of sentient races, and quite intriguing." Nezumi swore she saw a red tinge underneath her friend's feathers. "Anyway, first let me tell you that those chips won't work on everything, but you can have them updated with most of the known sentient races' languages at the Nexium Pilotus, the star station connecting the many races together. It's free of charge once registered." Sar touched the wall and a large portion of it peeled back, revealing a large transparent screen that extended to the floor beneath them as well. They had pulled forward and were now outside on some kind of paved pathway. A moment later the machine lifted into the air and Nezumi felt sick looking down the hundreds of feet they had traveled from. Her hands clung desperately to the sides of the seat, feeling that at any moment she would fall through the floor. A bit of vibration buzzed the area around them as they started zipping through the air at an unbelievable pace. Niasha had gripped tightly onto Sar, looking down through the glass. He made a forced cough as her grip loosened a bit after ascertaining they weren't going to fall. Nezumi laughed as she pulled away in embarrassment. "As I was saying, communication will be vital in any travels you do through the systems, and it would be a complete waste not to take advantage of the technology granted you. They certainly don't come cheap. I know a lot of this is overwhelming, but I have faith the two of you will be just fine." The craft came to a halt and started its descent to a large castle-like structure laid with bricks of amethyst. They pulled into another large bay connected to a spiral structure made of the same precious-looking gemstone bricks. The 3 of them were greeted by Lollarine, who guided them to the ramp to depart. There were 2 lizard men who appeared to be made of a shiny metal standing at the entrance, who shot a beam of light that scanned them from head to toe before allowing them to pass off the ship. As Niasha passed, one of them caught her by the shoulder. "Please remove any weapons. Violation will result in immediate termination." Niasha reached into her suit sleeve and produced 6 different knives, which she handed back to Sar. Lollarine looked back. "Didn't I tell you to put your things in the receptacle? Jeez." They continued forward, where they were eventually met by more of the metal guardians of the palace. The halls were decorated with intricate colors that helped offset the purple stonework of most of the building. Again, there weren't torches, but strange magic lights that had a consistent glow hanging on a chandelier-like protrusion from the ceiling. They found themselves in the throne room, where a large throne made of some purple material sat at its center. The queen glanced them over as they entered. Her scales were a fiery red color, and she wore many precious gemstones, along with clothes that seemed to float about her rather than cling to her, as if they weren't affected by the natural magics that kept one from floating off after jumping. "Ah, Alkim's unexpected visitors." The queen began picking out her long nails. Nezumi felt a slight pain in her side as Lollarine elbowed her. "Introduce yourself," she said in a hushed tone. I'm Nezumi of the Whistling Grass." She did her best to imitate the bow that Lollarine had made. "And I'm Niasha of the Whistling Grass." The queen continued picking at her nails, looking at the 2 of them. "Very well, I am Queen Sarepta of Alkim. Truth be told, I don't know what to think of you, and will be having you withheld here until I can investigate just how you came to be. Rest assured you will be well taken care of, as we aren't savages by any means. In fact, I'm even extending my guest quarters. I will not allow you to roam my walls unescorted, however. Lollarine, you'll be staying here for the time being and looking over these 2. Lollarine bowed her head, but it was clear from her facial features that she was annoyed with the task. They were led to a very large chamber, lavishly decorated in unusual paintings and adhering mostly to the theme of amethyst that this place boasts. Stepping up to one of the large mosaics etched and painted into the wall, she saw what appeared to be a grayish-green lizard man with a thin torso but well-muscled arms. He wore nothing save a cowl and a loincloth. The main focus of the painting was a green glass sword that glistened against an unseen light source. No, perhaps it was the blade itself that emanated this radiance. The word Eternia was etched below the mural on a placard, and she was genuinely surprised that something was written in a familiar character in place of the foreign ones the Bashari seemed to use. "Do you know anything about this Eternia, Lalorine?" Nezumi asked. Lalorine let out a sigh of annoyance, clearly burdened to bother with the two of them. "I've heard stories as a gecko, sure. They say he was the savior of our people, the one who led the Bashari Alkim to new heights and eventually negotiated the contracts with the aliens visiting their world. The great technological advancement led us to a new age of war to secure our place against the many other sentient races. After the war with man, another newcomer to the mix, we were given this planet and eventually joined the Golden Horizon. Of course, this was all millennia ago, so don't expect me to know all the details." She sat on one of the chairs and sunk into its cushion. A moment later a red light flashed on directly above her, and Lalorine sighed in relief. Nezumi walked closer and felt the heat emanating from the red light bathing her. "Just let me rest in peace. Why don't you two call for meals or something?" Niasha was already pressing a glowing sign that had a picture of a large piece of meat on a bone. It made an audible beep sound as she pressed it, and a moment later a frail-looking blue humanoid was at the front entrance. Is the order for the 37 Bokacho legs correct?" He looked at Niasha, who turned her head 90 degrees at him. "6 should do fine, Sute." It bowed and went off. A moment later, a host of platters were brought in, and Lalorine started to visibly salivate as she picked up 2 of the legs and took a large mouthful. Nezumi could barely manage to lift the thing from the plate. Using both hands, she hoisted it up and brought the oversized portion to her mouth to take a nibble. By the time she had worked around a quarter of it, Lalorine was on a second set. Looking over, she saw Niasha had already finished her leg and was dozing with the large bone set on her lap. The night passed quickly as the itis set in, and the 3 of them found accommodations were more than welcoming. The beds were unbelievably soft, and there was suitable water brought for bathing and consumption. The respite didn't last. They awoke to an alarm blaring and guards bursting through the door a moment later telling them to evacuate to the ships. Each of them quickly suited up. "What's going on?" Niasha said, looking over to Lalorine. "I don't know. I've been in here with you, remember?" A look of annoyance and fear was written on her face. They ran through the halls, and as they drew closer heard the sound of what she could only describe as someone hitting a pan with a metal ladle in rapid succession. Turning the corner, the walls were illuminated with flashes of red and white light, seemingly in time with the noises. Lalorine raised a hand to halt them. "They're using phasers and plasma. Your suits will give you limited protection, but anything above Class C won't have any trouble puncturing it. Activate your cores quickly now." She reached into her jacket and pressed on a small rectangular box that erupted into a purple film surrounding her. Lalorine then reached over, seeing the 2 of them struggling, and activated theirs as well. "Come on." Nezumi felt her heart beating out of her chest. It was all so exciting, but so unknown at the same time. Turning the final corner into the hangar, they saw that a small barricade was erected. 6 Bashari warriors fired their phaser and plasma weapons at the unknown enemy force beyond it. Directly in front of them, they saw the same ship they had entered on. A few stray shots rained over their heads and hit the craft, doing little damage to it. The door was opening and the ramp slowly started making its way down, Sar at its entryway. "Hurry!" he yelled. They started at a sprint for the ramp some 30 yards out. A sound like a vibrating metal spring enveloped the air, and Nezumi fell backwards as Lalorine's head evaporated into a red mist. One warrior turned. "Sniper, to the rear!" Nezumi felt a pull at her arm as she was sat dumbfounded looking at the aftermath of these weapons. "Come on, Nezumi!" Niasha screamed, dragging her. She brought herself to reality and picked herself up again to run. Another loud spring sound erupted and went inches from her own head. The heat caused her to wince and recoil back as the bright purple light momentarily blinded her. She put everything she had into running and leapt into the ship, where the door quickly closed behind them. Sar sat towards the front of the ship, the 2 of them behind him. "Haven't flown one of this class before. Come on, damn it, where is it? The ignition switch." His scales were profuse with sweat. "Here!" He slammed his hand onto the console and the machine roared to life. "Sit, quickly, this won't be easy." The ship started forward, the air tense around the 3 of them. Suddenly a large hole broke through the observation window and a large portion of the wall was scorched behind them. A red light flashed while the word breach was repeated by the ship's systems. Ugh! Sar slammed his fist into the console in front of him. That was a magnetic round. Whoever these guys are, they know what they're doing. The ship lowered itself the few feet it had managed. The lights once illuminating the many buttons dimmed and the screens around them went black. The ship began to vibrate and a red energy started enveloping the ship, pulling them forward. Traction. We're helpless. Arm yourselves. I won't die like I lived. He ran back into the main hole where he revealed a small armory. I'll take the plasma rifle. You two take the phaser pistols. Nezumi and Niasha gave him a blank stare. Look, just point this end at what you want dead and squeeze this. Simple, right? At this point, Sar's face looked a bit manic. Full grayscale! He raised the rifle into the air. It wasn't long before the ship crumpled to the ground and a beam of red light started cutting its way through the airlock. Sar positioned himself to the side of it, and as it fell forward he immediately dropped his rifle and raised his hands into the air. Wise decision, boy! Now, with a lot of you. Sar looked over his shoulder. Do as I do. This man is most likely Blacktooth. God's help us. Setting their pistols on the ground, Nezumi and Niasha followed Sar out of the craft, arms raised in supplication. A large black human stood in front of a crowd of figures, each leveling large rifles and even larger-looking tubes at some of them. Looks like we've made quite the catch, boys! He walked calmly up to Nezumi and brushed his hand across her face before gripping it. I have a place all picked out for you. 2 man-sized Waisoki in the same month. Other one was real feisty, though. Hope you played nice. She didn't last too long. Another of the crew, a small frog-like creature with large yellow bulging eyes, hopped in front of Niasha. This one looks like the other boy we found. He hopped up and pulled down her hood. Ah, the bird one, and that lad we found him with, eh? Maybe we could have him keep company in the hold, eh, boys? The men all let out loud cheers. Heard the birds all died out centuries ago. Definitely could get a good price on the last 2 of the kind, and any resulting brood. Pack her up. Now then, where was I? He flashed 2 rows of fetid teeth before pressing his dirty fingers into Nezumi's mouth. A yell from behind him halted his advance. Captain, the horizon! We need to kick rocks! He sneered back at the man, and Nezumi bit down hard into his fingers. Gah! Killer! But before a shot was fired, a rain of light started showering the area and ripping apart many of the pirates. Sar looked behind them to see a large, gold-plated ship floating high above, unleashing a hailstorm of fire into their assailants. The men fled back to the ship and started returning fire before zipping off, throwing the 3 of them to the ground. The gold-plated ship landed and opened, revealing 3 individuals in black and red suits with a large golden sun peeking the horizon. A human man stood in the middle, his head clean-shaven and his forehead wrinkled with age. At his side was another frog-looking person and a calico-covered cat person, each bearing polished-looking rifles. Nezumi spit some blood and bits of finger from her mouth and stared down at them in disgust. The man raised his hand, walking forward. Forgive us for taking so long. The distress signal was partially jammed and we had to surmise where it came from. Your queen is safe, but we're still unsure as to why Blacktooth and his vultures were out here. Usually they're more opportunistic, small colonies, or lone ships in the system, but to attack the main settlement of a major sentient race. Very interesting. Sar sat on the ground and panted a moment. We certainly appreciate the save. I was certain that was our end. The frog hopped beside him and helped him up. Listen, let's get you civilians somewhere safe, all right? Nezumi turned to Niasha and saw tears pooling around her feet. Listen, don't worry about those guys. They're gone now. Niasha whimpered a bit before looking over to her. Do you think it's true? That I'm one of the last ones? That the Tengu are no more? Nezumi felt the emotion emanating from her friend and went over and wrapped her arms around her. I don't know, but there seems to be a lot more out here than either of us ever imagined. Maybe home isn't lost just yet. Sitting on the ship, Nezumi couldn't help but ponder what Blacktooth had said. Did he have Eileen? Was she even alive? She wasn't the type to be subjugated by thugs. And the other 2 they mentioned. She couldn't help but think their brother graduates were involved in all of this. but how did they end up here? Where even is here? She said, gripping her head in frustration. The cat-looking crewmate walked in with a tray of mugs. It sat it down, and the table had appeared out of thin air, just as it had before in the Bashari Kingdom. Sorry about the whole ordeal. Name's Narrated. Hope you like Mentha. Her lips turned up in a friendly smile. Fresh from Lunapore this morning. She raised a cup to her lips and took a long sip before letting out a gasp of pleasure. Nezumi took a mug and sipped the warm beverage. It left a cooling sensation in her mouth that perfectly contrasted the warm liquid. She felt herself instantly relax and let out the same sigh of relief. Have some, Niasha. It'll make you feel better. A voice broke out around them. All crew, to the main deck, please. Nareen bowed herself out. Drink up, please. You all need the rest. Nareen quickly made her way to the main deck hollow room where Commander Zoroff stood over a projection of the system.
Everyone here? Good. Seems Blacktooth didn't make it far. Our photon emitter caught their main thruster on exit, and they are held up for repairs around the Result Nebula. I'm sure each of you know Blacktooth has a 13 million credit bounty on his carcass, and we're all in need of a payday, I'd assume.
The room was silent for a moment. Nareen raised a paw into the air. Commander, wouldn't it be wise to call for reinforcements? They're still a pretty dangerous bunch, and we have those refugees on board as well.
The wrinkles on the man's head clenched tight. You want to call in reinforcements and split the bounty? The refugees should be fine. This is an S-class vessel with modular shielding and quilidium-reinforced exo-resistors. I'd like to see that pirate even try and scratch this tub.
Celine, a Vidalcan woman with a serious attitude problem, leaned against the hollow table, its light reflecting off of her blue skin. I know I'm always ready for a fight, and I don't share anything. She licked her lips and drew a solidium knife from her strap. It's not about being ready for a fight, Nareen burst out. We have people that have been through enough on board. I want the money just as badly as the rest of you, but we're still dealing with Blacktooth, a notorious slave trader and the killer of countless innocents. He's taken out S-class vessels before. Celine turned and frowned at her. I think you're just being pussy. And she chuckled as Nareen's face began to redden under her fur. Now, dear readers, it's up to you to determine the next best course of action. Should the order be given to attack the crippled ship of Blacktooth and reap the bounty, or their own crew? Request reinforcements that will force them to split the bounty, but make it a safer operation. Or return to base and, while reporting the sighting of Blacktooth to command, the safest option for our dear refugees Nezumi, Niasha, and Sar. Let's write a story. Let's play a game without the dice.